Sangye Chodan Soki Shonam La Janju Bardu Dani Kyapsuchi Daki Jinso Jipa Sonamgi Drola Pincher Sangya Drupar Show Drola Pincher Sangya Drupar Show Sinjan Tamse Dewa Tong Dewe Gyutan Jambarkachi Simchan Tamse Dungal Tong Dungal Ge Gyutan Trawarkachi Sanchan Tamse Dungal Mewe Dewa Tam Itrawar Gurchi Sanchan Tamse Nyeran Charan Yilat Invetanyola Nibarger Chi. So I have been asked at each of the 4 Jewel Hearts centers where I'm teaching on weekends to do the Sunday morning talk. I like the honorific Tibetan name for talk, Lekshe, well said. To do the Sunday morning, well said. And Kathy and Harmit in Ann Arbor suggested that the Song of the Four Mindfulnesses by the 7th Dalai Lama would be a good format, because there's 4 cities on weekends and there's 4 verses in that song. The Tibetan name Umatati literally means a guide to living in the center. Center means balance, a balanced life. Balance between what? Then we can explain in many ways, outer, inner, and secret. And on the inner side, it means balance between the taking the things we experience too seriously and taking the things we experience not safely enough, not seriously enough. In other words, our sense of self, we have a sense of self, something's there. But if we take it too seriously, we think that the way I experience myself is who I am. And the same with outer phenomena. When we experience any kind of phenomena, the things that make us happy and sad and angry and relaxed and attached and free and so on, if we take them too seriously, believing they exist in the manner of their appearance, we get caught in pushing and pulling from the appearances. Tibetans use the 2 expressions, nang chok and tong chok. As I said yesterday at the end of my talks, I sometimes give away a free book, and I usually ask back what was the Tibetan expression I used for something, and the one who gets it right gets a free book. Nang chok and tong chok. Nang chok, chok means wing, facet, but it can also mean direction. In the direction of the appearing, the way things appear in my mind. And tong chok, in the direction of the emptiness of things, in the direction of the infinite nature. And why do they use that word, tong chok? Because the way the mind processes information through the senses and the brain structuring is by elimination. For instance, to identify an individual as, say, Tim or Bill, I take away everything which is not Tim, and I'm left with Tim. Take away everything not Bill, and I'm left with Bill. Take away everything that is not table, and I'm left with table. We tend to perceive things in that way. The processing apparatus works in that way. And we don't notice that it works in that way. We just think there's Tim, or there's Bill, or there's a table. But the end result is we have the sense that this phenomena we're perceiving, whether it's myself, Kangzaki Dakme, or outer phenomena, Chugi Dakme, that this is the way it actually exists. In other words, we mistake a process of identification with the thing itself. We think that thing really exists in the manner of its appearance. In other words, it really exists by taking away everything else. In other words, it has that way of existing on its own. So Nagarjuna speaks about a half a dozen ways in which this is false. This appearance is false. One is at Ranging-o. That Ranging-o, it seems to Rangshin Gitruba. It seems to be self-sustaining, something like that, self-existent. Ranging-o Truba, it seems to exist completely on its own. In other words, things seem to be separate. When we we use the word duality in Buddhism, this is what we mean. We don't mean there's no hot and no cold, no up and no down, no nose and no non-nose. We mean things do not exist in this manner of seeming to exist in their own way, on their own right, from their own side, all of those kind of terms. In other words, there's nothing about the glen which is separate from the rest of the universe. Although I appear separate, people look at me and say, what a handsome, great fellow, the most handsome and great in the whole of you. And they think, he must be self-existent because there's no one else quite as handsome and brilliant. They appear in that way. So the tongue choke is the reminder that in fact, there's nothing separate about anything. Everything is interconnected. I remember a couple of years ago when I was invited in Ann Arbor to sit with Gelek Rinpoche, Kyabje Gelek Doji during one of his Sunday talks. He said to there's some kids in the audience, maybe 10, 11 years old or something. He says, well, when you think of emptiness, maybe it's hard to come up with something, kind of a meaning. So for those little kids, it's maybe best to think of interdependent origination, connected to everything, that all things are connected to everything. Therefore, nothing stands alone. And that's part of Nagarjuna's, what he calls Gyugi Gyalpo, the king of thoughts, because all things are interconnected. Nothing has separate nature, separate existence. Nothing is Ranging-o Truba. Nothing is produced, established, existing from its own side. So this name of this text, Umatati, a guide to that balanced living. So that's the foundation of if we practice Mahamudra in the Tantric tradition, that's the foundation of Mahamudra practice. If on the other hand, rather than the new schools, Kargyu and Sakya and Kadampas and Ralupas and Shalupas and later Gelugpas, if we practice the Tantric Mahamudra, if we're in the Nyingma Urban, then Dzogchen, which is terms that weren't, Dzogchen, that term wasn't used by any of the new schools from the text translated during the Renaissance period of the 11th and 12th centuries, 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries. And Uma, this middle, is a very big key to how those other two systems, Chakchen and Dzogchen, operate, how we practice Chakchen, Chakya Champo, and Dzogpa Champo. So to speak on one of the 4 verses, each of the 4 weeks that I'm teaching on the weekends, this is the second of those. The last one was in New York last week, and that was the first verse, which is on Guru Yoga. Place the mind in the sphere of awareness of the teacher, the master, the Lama. Hold it in that sphere and rest there with a radiant positiveness, something like that. I marked the Tibetan text here. They've got it. It's too bad they put the Tibetan text in a phonetic translation, because Tibetan is monosyllabic, so it's much nicer when they write it out, like a word like drapa, like Losam drapa, which be spelled Grags, Gragspa. If you say drapa, you don't always know that it's really Gragspa, because of Tibetan silent letters, prefix letters, superscript, subscript, and prefix and suffix letters. So they often have as many as 5 letters around the root letter, helping to identify it. Because when you speak, it's usually quite obvious from context, but when you read, you don't get that context. And you can't say, hey, what's that? What did you say? Did you say drapa or Gragspa? Did you mean Gragspa or drapa? So in the Guru Yoga, which I spoke about last year from New York, I mentioned that Kyabje Gelek Rinpoche was at the teaching given by Ling Rinpoche, Kyabje Ling Doshi Chung, often known Tibetan as Yungzin Champo, the man who brought the Dalai Lama to enlightenment. Took the Dalai Lama from the kid of a bunch of turnip farmers in Amdo and made him into an illustrious lion amongst humans. And those of us who studied in Dharamsala in the 70s, he was one of our main teachers, main initiation masters. And so Kyabje Ling Rinpoche's main Dharma student was Dharma heir, was Dhamma Lobchu Rinpoche. After Ling Rinpoche passed away, Dhamma Lobchu became his main heir of his tantric lineages. And Gelek Rinpoche was very, very close to both of those lamas. In fact, Dhamma Lobchu Rinpoche was his Yongsen, was his guardian tutor, whatever you like, as a young kid. And so throughout his young life was one of his main teachers. And as a result, Ling Rinpoche was also one of his main teachers. So we casually say Ling Rinpoche. Tibetans always say Yungzin Champo, Kyabje Ling Dorje Chang, Yungzin Champo, the great upholder, the all-pervading master whose omniscient mind pervades the universe. Ling Dorje Chang, Buddha Varshadhara, Tantric Master. And during that teaching in Delhi at Tibet House, I was about 2 weeks before the teaching was to happen. That time the director of the Tibet House in New Delhi was Dobum Tuku, who had been one of my own teachers in Dharamsala. So he asked me to come down and help prepare for it, which was very nice, because whenever he invited me to Delhi, I'd always stay in his house with him. And he always had great house guests. So there were always Tulkus of all 4 traditions. So it was a very wonderful visit. And at that time, a really great Nyingma Lama was staying with him. So I got to read a bunch of Dzogchen and also other lineage texts with him, and sort of between doing things. So Rinpoche asked me to come down and help organize that teaching, and also to translate the root text. So when Ling Rinpoche taught the Four Mindfulnesses, they used my translation. There had already been one translation from Jeffrey Hopkins in one of his books of just that poem. But I published a set of poems by the seventh Dalai Lama, which first were published as Songs of Spiritual Change. And later, when they republished it, we expanded it and published it as Meditations to Transform the Mind. And the Song of the Four Mindfulnesses is one of those texts. It's about 30 Enlightenment poems written by the seventh Dalai Lama. It's actually the first book to be published by Snowline Publishers, who went on to become one of America's most important Dharma publishers. Before that, they had done American editions of a couple of British books, just basically photographed them and reprinted them and put their name on them. But that was the first book that they actually produced themselves. So when they went on to be successful, I always said to myself, it's thanks to the merit they got by publishing my book. They did very wonderful jobs and went on to publish many, many books, including, I think, the first really easily read book by the Dalai Lama, Kindness, Clarity, and Insight. Before that, the Dalai Lama there was one other book of his published, but it was a book that he had written for Theravada monks when a group of Tibetan lamas was invited. The Dalai Lama was invited to send some Tibetan lamas to Thailand to kind of interface on an interfaith level with the Theravada tradition of Thailand. And so Dalai Lama wrote a kind of a basic Cliff Note style book on Tibetan Buddhism, showing what's similar to Theravada and how the foundations are similar. So it sort of goes in those kind of Abhidharma style categories that are very big with the Theravadins. And but it wasn't an easy read because it was meant for monks who were already very well educated in the Buddhist language. I mean, the Buddhist conceptual structures, things like Four Noble Truths and Noble Eightfold Paths and the Six Senses and the 12 Gates and all of these kind of things, which aren't common parlance on the street, on the pubs of Chicago, or the bridge cafe, the bridge paying cafes, and general chit chat corners. We don't really hear those kind of terms a lot on Saturday Night Live, and when Alex Baldwin does his Donald Trump imitations, he doesn't go, well then, Four Noble Truths, 12 links of dependent origination on Russia. You better keep those in mind, or you could get in trouble. So then they brought out the Kindness, Clarity, and Insight, which was the Dalai Lama's basically general teachings he gave on his first tour of the States in '79, and nicely edited and written in kind of American pop lingo as opposed to Buddhist hybrid lingo. Which of the four is taught first, second, third, fourth? Sometimes you just take the text the way it's written and teach it like that. Sometimes someone teaching it as a practice tradition will teach whichever of the verses they consider most appropriate to that student. And in Tibet, this was part of the Mahamudra tradition, as I mentioned when I spoke in New York. The Tsongkhapa had lived in the Drikung Til monastery for a long time, and that's where he gathered many of his lineages, such as Six Yogas of Naropa and Chakrasamvara Tantras and the five deity Chakrasamvara and many other similar lineages. And the Drikung has a tradition known as the Chakchen Denga, the five-part Mahamudra, which I sometimes teach because it's kind of an easy 5-point way to navigate the vastness of the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha. And the four are really just a condensation of those five. The four being guru yoga or learning how to behave around an enlightened being, because most people don't know the reason why there are instructions on such things is we're used to just being chummy and such, and people have to learn a little bit of how to behave around. One of my gurus once said, the guru is like a mad dog. If you don't want to get bitten, learn how to behave around a mad dog before you come close. And no guru, no lama asks you to come close. So it's up to you to learn how to behave so you don't get bitten. And the other thing is our attitude determines a lot from what we get. Like, for instance, if we eat a food and we think, wow, this is really the most wonderful food, and we're really hungry and very enthusiastic, and it's one of our favorite dishes, we'll eat it and go, excellent, excellent, excellent. On the other hand, if we've got this idea that this is a terrible cook and a terrible ingredients and terrible food, even if it's the same dish, but we give it a different name, the person won't enjoy it. So by holding the right or positive, or I like, sometimes people say guru devotion. The Tibetan word is lama tensul, the way of relying upon a spiritual master, or leaning. I like the word leaning upon a spiritual master. A ten is something that holds you up. So it's sort of like you're learning to go in the way of enlightenment. The Buddhist idea, we go round and round and round until we figure out how to go up the spiral staircase to enlightenment. People live cyclic lives, repetitive lives. One day passes to the next without much transformation or learning, short of some, I don't know, divine intervention coming into our life. And so, Lama Latinsul, how to lean upon. It's a little bit like learning to walk, perhaps, where it helps when you're learning to walk if you have someone who holds your hands a little bit while you're getting to learn to walk. And sometimes it's given, Pabanka mentions it's a little bit like learning to go fishing. He says even going out to murder some fish takes some skill. Tibetans didn't like fishing. They thought people were terrible to be murdering fish. Those beautiful little fish with their big buggy eyes. When I first went to Tibet, you could put your hand through a stream like this and bump it into 3 or 4 fish. They were so thick and ferocious, just everywhere. And fish don't recognize what kind of footsteps are touching the earth. So then when they know it's a human, they think, oh, it's one of those nice Tibetans who think we fish are really beautiful beings that should be protected by law. So in Tibet, only doctors were allowed to kill fish. And for medicinal reasons, and of course they should do lots of mantras and so forth, just and meditate on emptiness, etc., so as not to get stuck in the murderous mindset if it's okay to murder fish. And so Pabanka uses that expression. He says even to go out murdering a few fish, you have to study with someone who knows fishing. So if you want to go to enlightenment, studying with someone is very important. And not only studying, but to get the right effect, you need to have right attitude and right action. So that's the verse I discussed last week, coming from when I was in New York and Jewel Heart. And the second one in the order they're written by the 7th Dalai Lama is the verse on compassion. So I thought I had a copy of my Meditations to Transform the Mind, so I could read it from there. But I don't. I looked in my bag and I think it's in the trunk of my car, and there's 1.5 feet of snow on my car. And if I open my trunk, I'll get snow over everything that's in my trunk. So I didn't look, so I'll use the translation from the Four Mindfulnesses, the Gelek Rinpoche, transcript of Gelek Rinpoche's teaching. And Gelek Rinpoche takes Ling Rinpoche's teaching and prints it in bold and gives a little commentary under it. And so I'll also look back at the, let's see, I even have some glasses somewhere. Where did I put them? Uh-oh, they're not here. I will use my mantras and increase the power of my eyes. Za, za, za. Kurwa, tame, dungogi. Sin, nan, rana. Locked or held in this prison. And we're locked and held in the prison of cyclic existence. In other words, wonder the 6 types of sentient beings bereft of happiness. This pangwa means impoverished, literally means impoverished. Someone who is like bankrupt, broke, zero, zilch, nada in wealth and money. That the 6 beings who are bankrupt of happiness, wonder 6 beings, 6 types of beings. In other words, the beings of the 6 realms. Fathers and mothers who protected us with kindness. So in other words, based on this sort of meditation coming from a sangha, all living beings. In a past life, my mother, my father, brothers and sisters. So this style of rhetoric a little different from Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna doesn't use that expression so often, although we do see it from time to time. But a sangha really sort of went to town with it. All beings, my mother in a life, past life. And here, forsaking desire and hatred. Forsaking means here, that I'll just run back to the Tibetan version. That was Churchung Pangne. Pangne, Pang in Tibetan, here, Pang, Chan Chan Pangne means throwing away or dropping. Literally means to drop. Pangwa Tan Langwa. There's 2 things we do in life. Pangwa Tan Langwa. Langwa is we take up things, and Pangwa is we let go of things. So Pangwa here means letting go of anger and irritation, anger and thoughts of revenge or vengeance. Like if someone says to me, Glenn, you're not the most handsome person in the world, you're really only number 3. It irritates me. I decide how to get revenge. And it dominates my conscience for the consciousness for the next days. Meditate on endearment and compassion. Let's see what word he's using for endearment. Oh, chezin, okay. Chezin, and chezin tong ningje. Ningje is literally compassion or kindness. It's a word usually translated from Sanskrit, karuna. And chezin is cherishing. So often when we say self-cherishing in Lojong tradition, it's instead of cherishing others, it's cherishing oneself, Dr. Chezin, which is an obstacle to enlightenment, holding self as more precious than others. So cherishing those others as one cherishes one's mother and father. So it has a meaning of kind of love here, I think. Meaning is just loving them, even though they just insulted me, from bumping me from number 1 to number 3 in the world's most handsome. Not letting your mind stray, place it within compassion. So like this idea of sort of a spiritual discipline to keep our mind in focus. I like that example by Shantideva, that we should walk through town, we're walking through town, a very busy marketplace. And if you've been to Indian marketplaces, there are hundreds of people pushing and shoving. And you've got a wound on your shoulder, so you hold your front shoulder in front so nobody bumps your wound from the side, and you kind of navigate through like that. And you're carrying a barrel of boiling oil on your head. And behind you is a swordsman who's going to lop off your head if you spill any of the boiling oil. It's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. So Shantideva uses this metaphor, how careful that person would be in that kind of a situation. We can go to like one of the Indian markets on Devon Street in the summer in Chicago and give one of you a big wound on one of your shoulders and a bucket of oil on your head, and I'll walk behind with the sword. And you'll get the full meaning of the metaphor. We should be that attentive to everything that happens in our life. Every moment of our life we should be that attentive. So these words, Tremba, for mindfulness, here the word Tremba is based on memory. It means we have to remember what it is we're doing. For instance, if we have a precept not to say anything negative about anyone, I think that would be a good precept. That's more important, I think, for Americans than the precept not to kill or not to steal or not to like run away with the spouses of others and stuff like that. Because we don't do those things very much. So it's easy to take a precept not to do something you never do. We should drop those and just have like harsh speech and divisive speech and put a barrel of water on of boiling water on our head and a swordsman behind. I think it would really calm the rhetoric on Facebook. The political rhetoric on Facebook would take a whole new tone. So Tremba Shi. Now, when we see mindfulness in English, people often think of it as Satipatthana, which in Tibetan is Trempa Nyewar Shakpa, closely placed mindfulness, closely placed memory. And they also use the word She Shin, which is in combination with that, Trempa and She Shin. She Shin is a kind of a mental alertness. When we look at the Buddhist Abhidharma for a map of the mind, we get a couple of different maps. One important one is from Asanga, where he speaks of 49 mental functions. And his brother Vasubandhu, who wrote the more popular Abhidharma manual, the Abhidharma Kosh, Mumbardze in Tibetan, is 51 secondary minds. So we all have 2 mental functions or mental capacities amongst those, Trempa, Tang, She, Shin. So as mental faculties, they're different. They're separate mental faculties. But sometimes in spiritual practice, they're put together as Tren She. Particularly in Mahamudra literature and Dzogchen literature, we'll often see them fused together because Tren and She means remembering your practice, remembering your training. So we are naturally conditioned as humanoid mammals that if someone is nice to us, we like them, and if someone is not nice to us, we dislike them, and if someone has nothing either nice or unnice to say, or they don't look either nice or unnice, we're just sort of bored by them or take no interest in them. So the ordinary way of being is just going round and round in circles, pushed by those humanoid mammalian instincts. And the main difference when we take up the Enlightenment path is we throw a spanner in those works. We apply Trampa Tang She Shin. We apply mindfulness or memory of a practice, and we apply She Shin, kind of an acute presence, to be sure that we're integrating that into our life moment by moment. So when we practice compassion, we can do in two ways. We sit on our meditation cushion and we do a contemplative exercise to cause our compassionate nature to grow. And then between them, by growing our compassion or increasing our compassion through sitting on a meditation cushion, contemplating compassion. That's one way, but when we get up off the meditation cushion, how do we carry that with us? When we get more deeply realized, of course, compassion will arise spontaneously and naturally. But basically, as Gompopo puts it, only if we love someone do we have compassion for them. And the humanoid mammalian way is to only love people who are good to you and who seem beneficial to you, and to have the opposite of love for those who are not good to you and are harmful to you, and to have a disinterested emotion for those who are in neither of those two categories. And when we talk about samsara, it means when this happens, it creates a cycle, doesn't it? Someone is unpleasant to us, we don't like them, the next time we see them, we think, oh, there's that rectum aperture, blah, 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 and we don't like that person, and then we're cold towards him, and then the dislike grows, and then that person sees us being unpleasant or cold to them, and they feel more cold towards us. And it just goes round and round and round, doesn't it? Whereas if we can take it the other way and actually interject something into that circular, instinctual, human mammalian way of samsaric behavior or repetitive behavior, we grow love and compassion within ourselves. And then when we're going around our daily life between meditation sessions, on the meditation session, we grow the power of our compassion, the power of our love. And between sessions, we walk around with Trempa, mindfulness of this is what we're doing. And secondly, a kind of alertness or awareness to know when and how we need to give a kind of a special effort to that practice. Like, for instance, if you're sitting, you're driving along the street in Washington, D.C., and you see, say, President Trump go by, you might have to apply mindfulness and alertness to have thoughts of compassion if you are in that political camp. If you're in another political camp, you see the Clintons go by and you're in the other political camp again. And, it's easy to use those kind of dramatic illustrations, but in our life it comes down to more simple things, doesn't it? It comes down to people in the office we're working in. It comes down to neighbors who are difficult to get along with and obnoxious. It comes down to relatives at Thanksgiving parties. And it comes down to animals and insects, and it comes down to trees and plants and such. It really comes down to all things that between sitting on the meditation cushion, thinking, I'm achieving enlightenment to benefit all beings. I'm working to achieve enlightenment to benefit all beings based on great compassion. But then we're walking around and we see someone who's very irritating, and we forget that we're working to achieve enlightenment to benefit all beings. And immediately harsh thoughts arise. From harsh thoughts come either cold actions or harsh actions, come cold words or harsh words. So Trempa Teng Sheshen, how to carry our practice from our meditation cushion. So with Guru Yoga, for instance, on what I taught in New York, was spoke on last week in New York. On our meditation cushion, we do a kind of a Guru Yoga meditation, or contemplation, seeing the Guru in front on the crown of our head and thinking embodiment of the Buddha's past, present, and future of all directions. And our gateway to enlightenment, our gateway to the sublime messaging of Buddha's past, present, and future of the 10 directions. Our gateway to the enlightenment technology. And in the Tibetan world, we sing a few verses like, relying on the feet of the Guru, sitting on the feet of the Guru, many beings achieved enlightenment. And so I myself follow in that footsteps, and so on and so forth. And the Guru dissolves into us, and we think, oh yes, now I've got all the blessings of Buddha's past, present, and future of the 10 directions through the portal of the Guru, merging my mind with the Guru's mind. But then we get up, and as we walk around in our daily life, we have to keep that kind of accent or that atmosphere or that presence. And that's done by Trempa and Sheshen. So similarly with compassion, and we often see, I think Buddhists like to criticize Christians as talking about compassion a lot. It's a highlight of Christian doctrine. In fact, I think Christianity stole it from Buddhism, and we should get a royalty whenever the Christians use the word compassion, because I think it was Christ took an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and to turn the other cheek. And he stole that idea from us Buddhists. We need the money, the royalty. But we'll often hear Buddhists complaining about Christians who talk a lot about compassion and then behave very badly in public. Well, the reality is also, I know many Buddhists who talk a lot about compassion and benefiting all beings and behave very uncompassionately when they're against someone they don't like or confronted with. So the question becomes, when we're off our meditation cushion, how to carry what we contemplate and carry that into our life in a practical, real way. And I think one of the great things of spending time around the illustrious masters like Ling Rinpoche and Dalai Lama, and Dema Lopchu Rinpoche, Kyabje Gelek Rinpoche, and so forth, is one does get to see how you can both disagree with someone about many things, even down to them, say, being a murderous person, killing people or something like that. And still they can have some kind of compassion, and to have compassion, you have to have love. And to have love, you have to have respect. Those sort of all go hand in hand. It's a triad structure supporting. I remember once when the Dalai Lama was giving a teaching in South India, the person who had assassinated one of his teachers in Tibet in 1947 during the coup d'etat of 1947, a person who had assassinated one of his teachers was there, and the Dalai Lama was teaching. I wasn't present. I heard this story from some monk friends who were there. And Dalai Lama was teaching, just sort of going on with, the standard kind of whatever teaching he was giving. And suddenly he noticed the fellow. Then he sort of looked at him and said, well, no one ever explained to me why it was necessary to assassinate my guru, Reting Rinpoche. And sort of this hush went over the crowd. And then he suddenly said, if I were the one who did that, I would immediately do 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras. And he went on. He went on with kind of a formula for transcending the negative karma of that deed, if you will. And because, as Christ puts it, let the one without sin throw the first stone. Everyone, if we look into our own past, we tend to think of ourselves as being the good guys, and people who are different than us or opposite to us as being the bad guys. But all bad guys think of themselves as good guys. I mean, the mafioso was famous for calling themselves wise guys. They were smarter than everyone else because they were living a much more sensible life in their mind. So this ability of the great masters, I think, to encounter beings who have harmed them very directly, because Dalai Lama's guru Reting Rinpoche was one of the really great masters of his generation. But in a coup, there's collateral damage here and there, and these things happen. And how to speak to those people, address those people, and encounter those people with compassion, with love, with respect. Because I think often in the West, we have this idea you have to earn respect. And I think that's true in you have to earn trust, I would say. But you don't earn respect in the Buddhist world. You earn trust in the Buddhist world. But you don't earn respect. You deserve respect. Everyone kind of does the best they can given the karmic positioning of where they were at that time. And so we can say that person really messed up and he's really a terrible person and da-da-da-da. And that can be true from a particular perspective. But if it were our mother, we would still respect them as our mother. If it was our father, we'd respect them as our father. We may not trust them. If our father was a drunk or our mother was a drug addict, we would still respect them, or we should respect them as our mother and father for what they did for us, giving us life and so on. We may not trust them to behave well around us, given their drunkenness or their drug addiction or whatever, or just people of violent instincts and great attachments and madnesses and so on. I like the way Tibetans translated the word klesha as nyunmang, delusions, translated nyunmang, crazy darknesses of the mind, crazed darknesses. So I think when we talk about love and compassion, this idea of respect is there, seeing them as our kind mother and father, not seeing them as a drug addict mother or father, as a drunk alcoholic mother or father, even though they may be either of those things, not seeing them as violent and abusive, even though they may be those things, but seeing them for the kindness side. I can't remember which text is in, perhaps Shantideva, or it could be Nagarjuna, I can't remember offhand. But Pavanka quotes it in his Norman Lakyang, the liberation, carrying freedom in your hand. That if you're walking through the desert dying of thirst and someone gives you a glass of water and it saves your life, You don't think to yourself, is that guy a murderer or a savior? Is he what? You're out there naked in the desert with nothing, and you're dying of thirst, and he gives you a cup of water. You don't ask anything about his character. Is that a good person or a bad person, noble person or an ignoble person, rich person, poor person, well-spoken or sort of rude, crude, and socially unacceptable person? You just think, very nice. I got that cup of water. It saved my life. Thanks a lot, buddy, whoever you may be. And you have a feeling of affection for that person and a feeling of respect for that person for their act of kindness. And you don't think of any of their flaws or faults, like, oh, the guy is like too skinny. He's not like beautifully full-bodied like Glenn Mullin. He's like one of those skinny types. I should look down my nose at him for being too skinny or anything like that. So the words he's using here, meditate on Sheizen, meditate on cherishing for that person. Meditate on care for that person. So endearment, I didn't use that word. So although originally we used my translation for Ling Rinpoche's, when whoever put this together changed some of my beautiful words for funny words like endearment. Being 3 syllables is too big. 1 or 2 syllables is good in poetry. I think I said something like caring or maybe even love. Love is a nice word in poetry because it's only 1 syllable. It was a dark and stormy night. Only one of those words has 2 syllables, and it becomes one of the most memorable opening lines of a book in English literature. I think that's why our good Donald Trump has been so successful. He rarely uses 2 syllables. And when he tries to use 3, he always stumbles. Not letting your mind stray, place it within compassion. Making your attention unforgetful, maintain it within compassion. So back to that same thing, unforgetful. Unless we can have tremba, so unforgetful here in Tibetan is just trenme, without dropping mindfulness, without dropping recollection, without dropping awareness of that practice. Hold it in compassion. Now, often this verse, although it mentions compassion and so on, it's really often said to be bodhichitta. And of course, there's a difference between compassion and bodhichitta. So the verse is said to be a verse on bodhichitta, although it doesn't mention bodhichitta. So Kyabje Ling Rinpoche in his teaching in New Delhi gave the bodhichitta teaching after reading the verse and talking a little bit about the verse. Actually, I myself first received that teaching on Four Mindfulness from Dalai Lama, maybe 7 or 8 years before that. He gave it in Dharamsala. And again, he broke into bodhicitta after reading and discussing in a general way. And why, how so? Because when we talk about compassion, if we're going to see all beings, my mother and father in a previous life, so have love and compassion for all beings. And love in Buddhism, the thought to help all others sustain their happiness. It's like if someone tells a joke and everyone starts laughing, and the laughing is like starting to come down a little bit. You have to quickly throw in like an add-on to bring the laughter back up. And then another wave of laughter goes over the crowd, and then it's dying down a little bit. Then someone else has to throw in another line to pick up the laughter once again. A little bit like that. Sustaining love or increasing love. And compassion, sustaining happiness and increasing happiness. And compassion, the wish to benefit others. And then how does that wish of love to sustain happiness and compassion, how can that really stretch to all beings? For instance, 10th level bodhisattvas have 10,000 times more happiness than we do, according to kind of theological or philosophical thinking. Someone who's a saint is way ahead of us, but they're still only halfway to enlightenment. So we should think to ourselves, oh, those poor 10th level bodhisattvas, they just can't get it. They're stuck on the 10th bodhisattva level. 1 inch to enlightenment, and they can't do it. Poor guys. How can I help them? Well, I have to race them to enlightenment. Those poor saints. You should be thinking, poor Saint Glenn. Although he's a saint, how can he get that last 3 yards to the finish line, to the touchdown? So that sort of thought comes in there with compassion. That all beings not in the state of full enlightenment still have their share, Rangi Cha in Tibetan, they still have their share of suffering, of frustration, of unhappiness, of difficulties, and so on. So how can I be of benefit to all living beings? Only by becoming a Buddha myself, only by achieving enlightenment myself. So when we think of compassion, it's not just to have a warm, fuzzy feeling for others, to be beneficial to others, although that warm, fuzzy feeling is very important. In fact, when I was a kid, some people used to call me Mr. Fuzzy. When I was a Buddhist meditating kid in my mid-20s, Mr. Fuzzy. Maybe it was my long hair, I don't know. But it's not just to have that warm, fuzzy feeling of general love for others and compassion for others, but to see that without the power of our wisdom is a very important factor. Therefore, Bodhisattva Shenrizi Avalokiteshvara is often shown with 1,000 hands of compassion, but each hand has an eye of wisdom in it. Without wisdom, compassion is a very limited force of good. In fact, compassion can be used to deceive others. Con artists often use a kind of a synthesized emotion of compassion and love to get the trust of others, don't they? And then to cheat them. They're called con artists because they basically convince others of something that is not true through synthesizing a trusting emotion of love, compassion, and so on. So in the Buddhist world, love and compassion are both these two mindsets, and both of those are conceptual mindsets. So we have to go beyond the conceptual mindset to the beyond conceptuality. Therefore, in compassion, Chandrakirti mentions the 3 kinds, Nyingje Sam, mere compassion, Chögyam Trungpa once called that idiot compassion. But for idiots, it's where you start. And it's good because it makes you feel good, and it's good because usually it helps others. You see a dog that's been, bitten by another dog, and you feel compassion. It may be idiot compassion. You may run up and get bitten, and then the dog will run away, and you won't be able to help. But it made you feel good, and in a way, the dog felt some attention. And 9 times out of 10, you won't get bitten, and you'll be able to do some help. And occasionally, it'll actually be beneficial to the other as well. And then Chögyam Zimba, held by the Dharma of cause and effect. Understanding the interdependence of things and the context of things, we can intervene, or we can participate or express our compassion in a way appropriate to that circumstance. So this isn't a completely idiotic compassion. It's like a slightly wiser compassion, you could say. So the idiotic one, Nyingje Tsun, mere compassion, is the foundation. It's what everyone starts with. It's a natural aspect of our consciousness. When someone you like or love is suffering, you feel it. Whether or not you can do anything about it is another issue. I think that's why, and one reason why I think Trungpa liked to use the word idiot compassion is sometimes when we interfere with others, it makes we get the wrong outcome. For instance, having compassion for an alcoholic, just giving them more alcohol because it's what they request, or a drug addict, giving them more drugs, or an abusive person, forgiving them for beating their kids, or women who always beat up their husbands. It never happens the other way around, guys, right? But anyway, we should always, mere compassion can be harmful as well as helpful. That's why the expression, the road to hell is paved with bad intentions. Feeding bears teaches bears to trust us, and then come hunting season, someone holds up a piece of ham sandwich and the bear walks over and kazam, that can have a bad effect. So the second one is much more realistic, understanding a deeper context of when to intervene and how to intervene, and how to show your love and compassion. And thirdly, with understanding of the nature of Nyingje Migmet, without an object, compassion with no object. With no object means with understanding of the infinity nature of all things, or the emptiness nature of all things, or how nothing stands alone. And those, you could call it a kind of a saintly compassion, a super wise compassion, seeing the other side of dependent origination, seeing how there's no compassionate there's no compassionate and there's no act of compassion separate from the three as a united circle. So I think we're running out of time here. It's 5 after 11. And we should sign out here, and that's the way it is. Gewa di nyordo da shenra ziwan drukerne troa chikyo malo pa ye sala kupar sho jangju samchok rimpoche make pana kegerchi kepa nyampa mepa yong kone kondu palwar show. And people who have the Book of Jewel Heart Prayers, is good if every morning and every evening you can chant 1, 3, or 7 times a brief prayer for the quick return. Nyurjung is known in Tibetan. The quick return of Kyabje Gelek Dorje Chang, that his reincarnation will take place quickly, and the young Tulku will be easily discovered, and he will be able to enter the training in accordance to the predecessors, and not only equal them in greatness, but perhaps even surpass. Thank you very much.